I should have known something was off the moment I walked in the door. The house smelled faintly of lavender air freshener, but it felt cold, like the warmth had been sucked out along with the last ounce of effort between us. Imogen was standing by the window, her back to me, her phone face down on the dining table, a habit I never liked but never questioned. She barely looked up when I came in, just a half-hearted, "Hey," as if I were a stranger passing by on the street. It had been a long, brutal day at the office, one of those days where even the coffee tasted like cardboard. I kicked off my shoes and shrugged out of my coat, hoping for a bit of comfort. But there was no hug, no "How was your day?" Just a sense of distance that felt thicker than the silence between us. "Rough day." I tried to ease into conversation as I threw my bag on the couch. She glanced at me and gave a tight, hollow smile. "Yeah, something like that." That was it. No follow-up. Just more silence. I stared at her a second longer, waiting for something, anything, a flicker of emotion, a spark of care. But she turned back to the window, and I told myself it was just a bad mood. Maybe she had a lot on her plate. God, I was so blind. Later that night, it all came crashing down. I was halfway through scrolling Reddit when I heard her voice, low, tense, and unsettling. "Gavin, we need to talk." It wasn't the usual "we need to talk about finances" or whose turn it was to walk the dog. No, this had a different weight to it. Like she had rehearsed it in her head 1,000 times before deciding this was the moment to say it out loud. I closed the app and turned to her. She was already sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped in front of her like she was bracing for impact. "Okay," I said, dragging out the word. I could feel my stomach twist as I sat down across from her. "What's going on?" She hesitated. Her lips parted, and then came the words that changed everything. "I cheated on you." For a moment, it didn't feel real. Her words floated in the air between us, detached from meaning. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to laugh it off like it was some cruel joke. But no, her expression stayed the same, serious but weirdly calm, like someone explaining they accidentally knocked over a glass of wine. It was Quinn from her office. Some prick I never even knew existed until that second. They met on a business trip, apparently. "It wasn't planned," she said, as if that made it better. "It just happened." "What the hell does that even mean?" I asked, my voice cracking. Her gaze dropped to the table. "I was unhappy, Gavin. I guess I just needed to feel something. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to flip the damn table." My chest felt like it was on fire, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, unable to figure out which part hurt more, the betrayal itself or the calm, matter-of-fact way she was telling me. "How long?" I finally managed to choke out. 3 months. 3 months. 90 days. A whole quarter of a year while I was busy going to work, cooking dinner, folding laundry, and pretending we were just in a normal, temporary rut. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "I thought maybe it would just go away." "Go away?" I repeated, incredulous. "Like a goddamn cold?" Her eyes brimmed with tears, but I wasn't buying any of it. She cried too easily, always had, and I knew better by now than to think her tears meant regret. This was about guilt. She wanted to offload her burden, and now it was mine to carry. "But I don't want to leave you," she added quickly. "It was just, I was lost, Gavin. I still love you. I just don't know how to love you right now." Her words hit like salt on an open wound. "So what, Imogen? You cheat, and then decide we can try again like nothing happened?" She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I want to fix this, but not like we were before. We can go back to that." "Back to what?" I wondered bitterly. Back to me loving her while she silently resented me? Back to our life, where I was the idiot who thought we were doing fine, while she was off screwing Quinn in some hotel room. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air." The next morning, I couldn't bear to be in the same room with her. I texted my sister, Colette, asking if she had time to meet. Colette knew me better than anyone. She wouldn't push, but she also wouldn't let me pretend everything was okay. We walked through the park in silence for a while before she gently nudged. "You good, Gav? You don't seem like yourself." "I'm not," I muttered. Imogen cheated. She didn't say anything at first, just took it in. Then, with a sigh, She said, "I'm so sorry. I wish I had words to make it better." Her sympathy stung in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't want pity. I wanted a solution, an answer that would magically undo everything. But instead, I got the same advice people always give when your life falls apart. Take your time. Don't do anything rash. At work, Roman, the one guy I trusted enough to be real with, picked up on my mood right away. "You look like you've been run over," he said, handing me a cup of coffee. "What's going on?" After a moment of hesitation, I told him. I laid it all out, right there in the break room. I expected shock or judgment, but instead, Roman nodded slowly. "Yeah, man, marriage is tough. I've been there. You think everything's okay, and then one day, bam, the rug gets pulled out." I gave a bitter laugh. "You too?" "Yep," he said, leaning back against the counter. "Not the same situation, but close enough. All I can tell you is find someone to talk to. Don't bottle this shit up. It'll eat you alive." By the time I got home that night, the house felt even more suffocating than before. Imogen was waiting for me, looking hopeful, like she thought one night apart would fix everything. I didn't say a word to her as I walked past and locked myself in the bathroom. The mirror reflected back a version of me I didn't recognize, tired, angry, and betrayed. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe revenge wasn't such a bad idea after all. The morning after the confession, Imogen and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where she had shattered my world just hours ago. The coffee between us had gone cold, untouched. The silence was heavy, loaded with everything we wanted to say, but didn't know how to begin. I stared at the wood grain, tracing imaginary patterns with my eyes. "So, what do we do now?" she finally asked, her voice tentative. I exhaled through my nose, weighing my words. I don't know. Neither of us wanted to say the word divorce. It was looming over us, unspoken but present. After what felt like an eternity, she broke the silence. "I don't want us to end like this, Gavin. I know I screwed up, but maybe we don't have to throw everything away." I scoffed, but not with as much force as I intended. "And what? We pretend it didn't happen?" "No," she shook her head slowly. "I'm not saying that, but maybe we can try. I know I owe it to you to try." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my face with both hands. Part of me wanted to tell her to pack her things and leave. But another part, the part that remembered the good times, the memories before everything went to hell, whispered that maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely beyond repair. "We can try," I said cautiously, "but only if we're honest with each other. From now on, no more lies, no more sweeping shit under the rug." She nodded quickly, as if she had been waiting for that one lifeline. "Complete honesty," she repeated, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in her for a while. Hope. That was the beginning, or maybe just the beginning of the end. It was hard to tell. Our first step was therapy. Neither of us was thrilled about it, but we both knew that if we had any shot, we'd need help. Dr. Holland's office was sterile and painfully quiet, the kind of place that smelled like peppermint tea and anxiety. Imogen sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking small and uncomfortable. I crossed my arms, already regretting this whole thing. Dr. Holland, an older woman with sharp eyes and an annoyingly calm voice, wasted no time. "Why are you two still together?" she asked, her pen poised over a notepad. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Imogen and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us had a ready answer. We were here, yes, but why? Out of love? Out of guilt? Out of fear of starting over? I guess because we've been together so long, Imogen offered weakly. Dr. Holland raised an eyebrow. "That's not a reason. That's inertia." Her words hit harder than I expected. Inertia. Yeah, that's what it felt like. We were still together because it was easier than figuring out how to separate. "I want to fix this," I said, more to myself than to anyone else. "I just don't know if I can." "And you, Imogen?" "Det är Holland prömtid." "I want to try," she whispered, but there was something about the way she said it that made it sound like an apology instead of a commitment. Dr. Holland assigned us homework. Write letters to each other. Not just about what we were feeling now, but about everything we had kept bottled up over the years. years. It was supposed to be therapeutic, a way to bridge the gap between us. I stared at the blank page that night, pen in hand, realizing how foreign it felt to put my emotions into words. When I finally wrote it all down, every disappointment, every resentment, every moment where I felt invisible, it felt like ripping open a wound I hadn't realized I had. I handed Imogen the letter the next day, my stomach twisting as she read it. Her face crumpled as she reached the end. I didn't know, she whispered, tears spilling over. I had no idea you were carrying all of this. Yeah, I said quietly. Neither did I. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine regret in her eyes. Not just guilt for getting caught, but regret for everything she had let slide between us. It was a small step, but it felt like the first real one we'd taken in a long time. A week later, we went to a dinner party hosted by our friends Darian and Alara. I dreaded going, but it felt like something normal, and we needed normal. At first, everything was lighthearted, drinks, jokes, easy laughter. But as the night wore on, the conversation turned more serious. Darian, slightly tipsy, started talking about the struggles he and Alara had faced over the years. Relationships are work, he said, swirling the wine in his glass. Everyone screws up. It's what you do after the screw-up that matters. Imogen glanced at me from across the table, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Maybe we weren't the only ones struggling. Maybe we weren't as alone in this as we thought. Then Cassandra showed up. I hadn't seen her in years, an old colleague from my early days at the firm. She slid into the seat next to me with that same sly smile I remembered. Well, she purred. Gavin, it's been a while. We exchanged small talk, catching up on old times. She was still sharp, still charming, and just flirtatious enough to be dangerous. At one point, she leaned in, her voice low and conspiratorial. You ever think about starting over, Gavin? Fresh slate, new life, no baggage. For a split second, I considered it. The idea of leaving everything behind. Imogen, the mess we had become, was tempting. Cassandra smelled like freedom, like an escape from everything weighing me down. But then I looked across the room at Imogen, laughing softly at something Alara had said, and I realized something. Running away wouldn't fix anything. Escaping wasn't the answer. The problem wasn't just her. It was us, both of us. I pulled back, offering Cassandra a polite but firm smile. I appreciate the thought, I said, but that's not where I'm at. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. Well, if you change your mind, she trailed off, giving me a knowing look before slipping back into the crowd. On the ride home, Imogen was quiet, her head resting against the window. I could feel the weight of everything between us, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel unbearable. It felt possible. Difficult, yes, but possible. Maybe that was all we needed for now. The possibility of something better, no matter how far away it seemed. Things started to unravel when I saw her phone light up with a message from Quinn. I was walking past her on my way to grab a drink from the fridge when it happened. His name right there on the screen, staring back at me like a slap to the face. She saw me notice and quickly flipped the phone over, a move so incriminating it made my stomach turn. What the fuck, Imogen? I said, stopping dead in my tracks. It's not what you think. Her voice was already defensive, and that only made it worse. It's exactly what I think. Why the hell is he texting you? She stood up from the couch, holding her hands out like she was trying to calm me down. He was just checking in. That's all. I didn't respond. That's supposed to make me feel better? My voice rose without me meaning it to. Why does he think it's okay to text you at all? What kind of boundaries do you even have with him? I didn't ask him to message me, Gavin. I can't control what he does. Don't give me that. I could feel myself unraveling. Every ounce of restraint I had slipping away. What the hell are we even doing here if you're still entertaining this guy? Her face twisted in frustration. I'm not entertaining him. Jesus, Gavin. I told you I want to work on us, and I'm in it. Bullshit. I shot back, the anger bubbling over. You're still in contact with the guy you cheated on me with, and I'm just supposed to be okay with that? How do I know it won't happen again? She hesitated, and that tiny moment of silence hit harder than any answer she could have given me. I don't know, she finally whispered. Those 3 words were like a knife to the gut. I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had knocked the wind out of me. "You don't know?" I repeated, incredulous. "You can't even promise me that it won't happen again?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I wish I could, Gavin, but I don't want to lie to you." For a second, I just stood there stunned into silence. Then the fury came roaring back, stronger than ever. "So, what the hell is the point of all this? Why are we even trying if you can't guarantee anything?" "I'm trying," she cried, her voice breaking. "I'm doing the best I can, but I can't give you promises I'm not sure I can keep." I stared at her, feeling something inside me snap. All the progress we had supposedly made felt like a cruel joke now. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that she had cheated or the fact that she couldn't even assure me it wouldn't happen again. I stormed out, slamming the front door behind me. Roman had been telling me about this support group he'd been going to for a while now. It was for guys who had been through infidelity, just a place to talk, no pressure. I'd brushed off the idea at first, thinking it sounded too much like group therapy. But after that fight with Imogen, I found myself calling him up. "You should come," Roman said without hesitation. "It's not as weird as you think. It helps." I showed up to the meeting that night, feeling awkward as hell. The room was small, with a circle of folding chairs and a handful of men sitting around, nursing coffee cups like they were clinging to life rafts. Roman introduced me to the group and gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. One guy in particular stood out, Daniel. He had this calm, almost weary vibe, like someone who had been through the ringer and come out the other side, but not without scars. When it was his turn to speak, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and told his story. He had tried everything to save his marriage after his wife's affair. Therapy, date nights, the whole 9 yards. For a while, it seemed like things were getting better. But the trust never really came back, and the resentment started to eat away at him. "I thought forgiveness would be enough," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "But the truth is, forgiving her didn't make me forget. And after a while, I realized I didn't like who I was becoming. I was paranoid all the time, checking her phone, second-guessing everything she said. It was killing me." I nodded along, feeling every word like a punch to the gut. That was exactly where I was headed. Paranoia, bitterness, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. "So, what did you do?" I asked, even though I had a feeling I already knew the answer. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. "I left. It took me a long time to realize that staying wasn't brave. It was just dragging out the inevitable." The room went quiet after that, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Roman shot me a look, and I knew what he was thinking. This could be you. The conversation with Daniel stuck with me long after the meeting ended. I couldn't stop thinking about his words. How forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting, and how staying could sometimes be just another form of cowardice. It made me wonder if I was fighting for something that was already broken beyond repair. The weeks that followed were strange. Imogen and I drifted through the days like strangers sharing the same space. We still lived under the same roof, but it felt more like cohabitation than marriage. The intimacy, the connection, the little moments that used to matter, they were all gone, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. She tried, I'll give her that. She cooked dinner more often, asked about my day, made an effort to be affectionate. But it all felt forced, like she was checking off boxes on a to-do list. And no matter how hard she tried, I couldn't shake the image of her with Quinn. I couldn't stop the gnawing suspicion that it was only a matter of time before she betrayed me again. Some nights, I would catch her scrolling through her phone, and my mind would race. Was she texting him? Was she thinking about him? Every time her phone buzzed, my heart jumped in my chest. It was exhausting living in that state of constant doubt. We were trying to rebuild something, but it felt like we were building on quicksand. The foundation was cracked, and no amount of effort could make it solid again. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it to be. I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. And worst of all, I wasn't sure if she wanted me the way I wanted her. The fight had stripped away the illusion that we were on the same page. Now, I could see the cracks in her resolve, the hesitation in her promises. She wanted to try, but not at the cost of her own freedom. Not if it meant cutting ties with the man she had betrayed me with. Every day, I found myself standing on the edge of a decision I wasn't ready to make. Should I stay and fight for something that might already be gone? Or should I cut my losses and walk away before I lost myself completely? The worst part was there was no clear answer. No guidebook for this kind of thing. Just a constant, gnawing uncertainty that ate away at me, day by day, bit by bit. And the terrifying truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. Dr. Holland had this brilliant idea, or at least that's how she sold it to us. Spend a whole day being completely honest, she said. Say exactly what's on your mind. No filtering, no dodging. Just full transparency, even if it's painful. I didn't like the sound of it, but at this point, we were desperate. Imogen and I had been circling the same issues for weeks, and if something didn't change, it felt like we were going to crash and burn. So, we picked a day, a Saturday, when neither of us had anything planned. We woke up, stared at each other across the bed, and agreed today would be different. Today, we lay everything out, no matter how much it hurt. At first, it was awkward as hell. We shuffled around the kitchen, making breakfast without saying much. Then Imogen, in typical Imogen fashion, broke the ice. I don't know how to start, she admitted, pouring coffee into her mug. I guess I'll just say it. I've felt emotionally starved in this marriage for a long time. That hit me harder than I expected. I knew she was unhappy. We wouldn't be here if she wasn't. But starved was a word that cut deep. How long? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. A few years, she said. I kept waiting for things to change, but they never did. And after a while, I was scared to tell you. I thought if I brought it up, it would push you further away. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Part of me wanted to argue, to defend myself, to tell her she could have spoken up any time. But I knew that wasn't the point. She had felt this way, whether I liked it or not. And Quinn? I asked. Was he the solution to that? No, she said, shaking her head. He wasn't the solution. He was a distraction, a way to feel something again. She paused, then added quietly, but I know that doesn't make it any better. I took a long breath, forcing myself to stay calm. This was what we had agreed to. No holding back, no pretending things were fine. I guess it's my turn, I muttered, setting my coffee down. I've been distant because I don't know how to not be. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I've never been good at being vulnerable, I said, feeling like I was standing naked in front of her. Showing emotions, asking for help, it's always felt like weakness to me. And I know that made me cold. I know it made you feel alone. But the truth is, I was scared. I still am. I didn't want to seem, I don't know, needy. Imogen's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. I wish you would have told me that, she said quietly. I never wanted you to be perfect, Gavin. I just wanted you to be you. It was such a simple thing to say, but it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the burden of pretending everything was okay. I wasn't holding everything inside. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart because of it. After breakfast, I don't know what got into us, but we decided to take a trip. Out of nowhere, I suggested we drive to the lake where we spent our honeymoon. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to remember what it felt like when things were good between us. Imogen hesitated at first, but then she nodded. Let's do it. The drive was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The silence between us felt different now, less tense, more reflective. As we wound our way through back roads and familiar scenery, I couldn't help but feel like we were chasing ghosts. When we finally arrived at the lake, it was late afternoon. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight, and everything looked just like I remembered it. We found a spot by the shore and built a small campfire, just like we had done years ago on our honeymoon. It was strange being back here, surrounded by memories that felt both distant and painfully close. Sitting by the fire, we shared stories from the early days of our relationship. We laughed about the stupid fights we had when we first moved in together, reminisced about the night I proposed, and remembered the long, lazy mornings we used to spend wrapped up in each other, without a care in the world. At one point, Imogen leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't feel forced. It felt real. I rested my cheek against her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender shampoo. She whispered, it doesn't feel so impossible right now. I didn't say anything, but I felt it too. That flicker of connection, fragile and fleeting, but there. It wasn't a fix, and it didn't erase everything that had happened between us. But it was something, and after everything we'd been through, something felt like a start. We stayed by the fire until the stars came out, wrapped in the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled with words. In that moment, sitting by the lake where we once promised each other forever, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance at finding our way back. Things between us had been better, maybe not perfect, but better. We weren't fighting as much, and there were moments, fleeting as they were, where it felt like we might actually pull through. I started to feel like we had a shot at something real again, like the lake trip hadn't been just a nostalgic fluke. Then the message came, and all the progress we'd made felt like it was dangling by a thread. It was a Tuesday night. I was on the couch scrolling through my phone when Imogen came into the room, holding her phone out in front of her like it was radioactive. There was an anxious look on her face, but not the kind of guilty expression I'd gotten used to seeing. This was different. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. I set my phone down, heart already racing. "What is it?" She sat down beside me, turning her phone so I could see the screen. It was a message from Quinn. "Quinn, can we meet? Just to talk. I need to see you." For a moment, I just stared at it, my mind going blank. I could feel my pulse in my ears, and a million thoughts swirled around in my head. Imogen sat beside me, twisting her hands in her lap, waiting for me to say something. "You told me you haven't talked to him," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I haven't," she said quickly. "I didn't even know he would message me. I swear, Gavin, I haven't responded." I looked at her, trying to figure out if I believed her. There was no trace of deception in her eyes, no hidden agenda. It hit me then, she could have easily deleted the message and kept it from me. She didn't. She brought it straight to me, and that had to mean something, didn't it? "You're telling me the truth?" I asked, still bracing for the possibility that this was another lie. "Yes." She nodded. "I told you I'd be honest with you, and I meant it." For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed her. It was a weird, unsettling feeling, realizing that maybe, just maybe, she was serious about fixing things this time. "So, what do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to block him," she said without hesitation. "But I wanted you to see it first. I wanted to prove to you that I'm not hiding anything." I exhaled, the tension easing just a bit. "Block him then." She did, right there in front of me. And for the first time, I felt like she was choosing me, not out of obligation or guilt, but because she wanted to. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, something was enough to keep me hanging on. That weekend, we decided to go to the coffee shop where we'd met years ago. It wasn't planned, just one of those spur-of-the-moment ideas. We were driving aimlessly, talking about nothing and everything when I mentioned the place. Imogen gave me a small, tentative smile. "Let's go." Walking through the door felt surreal. The place hadn't changed much. Same mismatched chairs, same smell of espresso and baked goods. The barista was different, of course, but everything else felt frozen in time. We found our old table by the window, the one where I had made some lame joke about the weather all those years ago, trying to make her laugh. It worked back then. I wondered if it would now. We sat down, and for a moment, it was like the weight of everything lifted. We weren't the couple who had hurt each other, betrayed each other. We were just Gavin and Imogen, two people who had once been crazy in love, sitting at a coffee shop trying to find their way back. "This place feels smaller," Imogen said, running her fingers along the edge of the table. "Or maybe we've just grown." "Maybe both," I said, giving her a small smile. For a while, we just talked about the little things, the funny things, the things that didn't carry the heavy burden of our past. But eventually, the conversation shifted to the present, and then to the future. "I know I've hurt you," Imogen said, her voice soft but steady. "And I know it's going to take a long time before you can trust me again. If you ever do, I don't know if I can," I admitted, and saying it out loud felt like tearing off a bandage. "But I want to try." "Me too," she whispered. And for the first time in a long time, there was no hesitation in her voice. We sat there for a long time talking about our fears, our hopes, and what we wanted from each other moving forward. It wasn't easy. Nothing about this was easy, but there was something raw and real about sitting there, laying everything out on the table. No more pretending, no more hiding, just two people trying to find their way back to each other, one honest conversation at a time. "I want us to work," I said finally. "But if we're going to do this, we need to be all in. No half measures." She nodded, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time: determination. "All in," she repeated. And just like that, we decided to give it one last shot. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. There were no declarations of undying love or sweeping promises of a perfect future. Just two people sitting in an old coffee shop, making a choice. A choice to try. We both knew that deciding to stay together was only the first step. If we were going to have any shot at a real future, we had to make changes, not just to our relationship, but to ourselves. So, we started small, we gave each other space, worked on things separately, and tried to find pieces of ourselves we'd lost along the way. I signed up for a fitness class at the gym, a boot camp thing that kicked my ass the first few weeks. It felt good though, sweating out the stress, focusing on something physical. It wasn't just about staying in shape. It was about reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd given up. I even started reconnecting with Colette. We grabbed lunch once a week, just brother and sister, no heavy conversations unless they happened naturally. She was relieved to see me doing better, though she wasn't shy about reminding me to keep my eyes open. "I'm glad you're trying, Gav," she said over coffee one afternoon. "But don't forget to take care of yourself, no matter what happens." Meanwhile, Imogen threw herself into painting. She hadn't picked up a brush in years, but once she did, it was like watching a part of her come alive again. She spent hours in the spare room, which she'd turned into a makeshift studio. I'd hear music playing from behind the door and smell turpentine in the air. Sometimes I'd peek inside to find her completely absorbed in her work, lost in the swirl of colors and brushstrokes. It was strange, but in a way, it was comforting to see her that way, doing something for herself, not for anyone else. We weren't just fixing the relationship. We were learning how to be individuals again. And slowly, bit by bit, it started to feel better. Not perfect, not like it was before, but better. A few months passed, and we found ourselves back in Dr. Holland's office for a follow-up session. The room felt less intimidating this time, the chairs less stiff. Dr. Holland gave us that same calm, searching look she always did, but this time it didn't make me feel defensive. It just felt normal. "So," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "how are things?" I looked at Imogen, and she gave me a small, reassuring smile. "We're doing okay," I said, and I meant it. "Better than we were." Imogen nodded. "It's been hard, but we've found a kind of closeness we haven't had in years." Dr. Holland smiled gently. "That's a good start." It was more than a good start. It was the first time in a long while that we'd sat down and said out loud that things were moving in the right direction. And it felt real, not forced, not something we were saying to check off a box. We weren't pretending everything was fixed. We knew there would still be hard days ahead, but we were learning how to navigate them together. The last scene of this whole mess wasn't grand or dramatic. There were no fireworks or sweeping declarations of love. It was just the two of us standing by the river, holding hands as the water flowed gently past. The sky was a soft gray, the kind of color that promised rain but hadn't quite delivered it yet. The air smelled like wet earth and autumn leaves, and there was a chill that made Imogen squeeze my hand a little tighter. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the water, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. There was no guarantee of a happy ending. There never is. But for the first time, it felt like we were on the same side, ready to face whatever came next. Not as perfect versions of ourselves, but as the messy, complicated, flawed people we were. Imogen glanced over at me, her expression soft but serious. "I know it won't always be easy," she said, "but I want us to try. I want this to work." I nodded, tightening my grip on her hand. "Me too." And that was it. No promises we couldn't keep, no illusions about what the future held. Just two people standing by the river, ready to walk forward together, one step at a time, with no more lies between us. Just honesty, trust, and the hope that maybe this time we'd get it right.